Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Explore the Exceptional with Dr. Gross. I'm Dr. Bob Wenzel Gross. Today I'm going to be presenting my Reforming UFOlogy series. Today, in 2020, it's quite evident that UFOs really do exist. About half of Americans believe that UFOs are real. 86% of adults in the United States say that they have heard or read about unidentified flying objects, or UFOs. I would guess that about 50% of those adults, the ones that have read or heard about UFOs, believe that they are possibly extraterrestrial in nature. But we don't know. And that's because we haven't done the science yet. That's why I'm advocating for deconstructing ufology and rebuilding it. Episode 1 of my Reforming UFOlogy series is titled Ufology's Weak Foundation. According to United States Air Force Regulation 200-2, when the expression unidentified flying object, or UFO, was first coined, it referred to any airborne object which, by performance, aerodynamic characteristics, or unusual features, does not conform to any presently known aircraft or missile type, or which cannot be positively identified as a familiar object. And by familiar object, I mean balloons, astronomical bodies, birds, and things like that. The original definition does not say anything at all about extraterrestrial intelligent beings. Ufology is the study of UFOs. However, ufology is regarded by skeptics, scientists, and science educators to be pseudoscience. Ufology was established due to concerns generated by the initial wave of UFO sightings back in 1947. The 1947 Roswell Incident is considered by many to be the foundation or cornerstone of ufology. Back in 1947, the threat of war caused a lot of nervousness. As a result, Cold War hostility between the United States and the Soviet Union caused the initial surge of UFO sightings. Based on a report by a Roswell, New Mexico ranch foreman, on or about July 8, 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release. That press release stated that a flying disc had crashed on a ranch near Roswell. Nobody actually saw the so-called flying disc, and nobody actually saw it crash. However, unfamiliar space-age metallic debris was retrieved near the alleged crash site. Eyewitnesses maintained that some fragments retrieved near Roswell back in 1947 had an aluminum-like finish that was dull on one side, but it appeared shiny on the other. The stuff was thin, lightweight, and would flex, not dent, when struck. This peculiar metal seemed to be cut-proof. These metallic bits could be folded, but then they would go quickly back to their original shapes. Kind of a memory metal. Although not scientifically analyzed at the time, none of the debris was determined to be extraterrestrial in origin. But somebody somewhere jumped to the conclusion that those mysterious memory metal fragments, which closely resembled today's Mylar, came from a planet more advanced than Earth. Eventually, news reporters were shown debris allegedly taken from the crash area. The debris included foil, rubber, and wood. The debris seemed to confirm that the object had indeed been a weather balloon. On July 8, 1947, the Roswell Daily Record newspaper initially reported that the debris may have come from a UFO. However, the Roswell Daily Record submitted a correction on July 9th, 1947, stating that the wreckage was actually pieces of a weather balloon. During the following 30-plus years, the Roswell UFO crash, the story itself died down and vanished. Then in 1978, the National Enquirer, that magazine, published the original July 8, 1947 Roswell Daily Record story again. However, the July 9, 1947 follow-up correction was not reported in the National Enquirer piece. When that uncorrected version of the story was published, U.S. government alien cover-up theories began to spread like wildfire. Then around the late 1970s, the late Stanton Friedman, a former nuclear physicist and longtime UFO researcher, started interviewing people allegedly connected with the 1947 Roswell Incident. In 1980, a book entitled The Roswell Incident was published. The Roswell Incident book was compiled from the early research of Stanton Friedman, Charles Berlitz, and William Moore. When the book was published, the National Enquirer interviewed Major Jesse Marcel, who was initially assigned to look into whatever crashed near Roswell back in 1947. Soon, unverified assertions surfaced that the United States government was hiding an alien craft and some alien bodies too. The 1980s produced renewed charges that the United States government, was withholding information about the 1947 Roswell flying disc incident. Now, a little bit about my Roswell backstory. During the 1980s, I was conducting doctoral research at Penn State University. And one day, I was physically searching for information at the main library at Penn State's University Park campus. At some point during my search, in those stacks there were just books stacked on top of each other, I ran into a book titled The Roswell Incident. The title of the book sort of just jumped out at me. So I grabbed the book and I took it to a nearby table and I started reading it. And I almost read the entire book and I forgot about the research that I was doing on acoustics or music or some other topic. So I really became curious about the UFO topic and started to do some research on my own. Here's what I found. Much of New Mexico is sandy. It's undeveloped and desolate. But the state's wide open spaces and clear skies make it an ideal location for working on rockets, launching experimental balloons, and testing atomic bombs. I moved to New Mexico in 2001. The tragedy of September 11, 2001, provoked me into doing something for my country. So in 2001, I placed my life's work as a school district administrator on hold, and I joined AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is the domestic Peace Corps. And I served my country as a volunteer in New Mexico. Living and working in New Mexico, I traveled extensively around the state, and I learned as much as I could about that state and its inhabitants. From 2007 to 2010, I served as a turnaround administrator for a small school district in the resort town of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. As part of my administrative duties, I served on the New Mexico Gang Task Force. That gang task force met in Roswell and trained in Roswell, New Mexico. So whenever I was in Roswell, I went around and tried to interview New Mexicans who had some exposure to the 1947 Roswell incident. Then, moving along to 2018, I was living in the state of Indiana, and I started analyzing and evaluating the data I had gathered on the Roswell incident. and I arrived at the following conclusion about what really happened in Roswell back in 1947. Here's what I found. In 1946, New York University entered into a contract with Watson Laboratories of the Air Materiel Command. Under this contract, New York University was commissioned to design, develop, and fly constant level high altitude balloons. The contract that they signed required that the high altitude balloons be designed so that they could be tracked using radar or radio direction finding. According to the reports that I read, in the mid to late 1940s, materials used in experimental balloons were listed as polyethylene, nylon, and silk fabrics. The balloon coatings that they experimented with were listed as neoprene, butyl rubber, and aluminum. My conclusions about the 1947 Roswell incident took into consideration no less than two viable options. For this YouTube video episode, I'm presenting the most viable option, which I will refer to as Service Flight 9. The Service Flight 9 option concludes that the Roswell incident began on or about the night of Thursday, July 3rd, 1947. That night, a balloon train called Service Flight 9 was assembled to include a cluster of balloons, a dummy payload, reflective radar targets, and at least one prototype metallized polyethylene balloon. Those service flights were not logged or fully accounted for. So after being sent up from Alamogordo, balloons often descended in the vicinity of Roswell. So while Service Flight 9 was floating above the Foster Ranch in Roswell, or near Roswell, a powerful storm developed. The storm produced strong winds and lightning. High winds from the storm and/or lightning shattered Service Flight 9's balloons. Fragments of tattered aluminum-covered plastic and other rubble floated down onto the Foster Ranch. The foil-like memory metal recovered from the debris field near Roswell was direct evidence that scientists had been researching and developing ways to effectively coat polyethylene with metal. Shards of metallized polyethylene were included in the debris field. Other materials reported salvage from the debris field that were connected to the 1947 experimental balloon trains included but were not limited to pieces of rubber, parts of reflective panels made of balsa wood and reflective paper, purplish pink reinforced tape imprinted with symbols, and heavy gauge nylon rope. By May of 1948, polyethylene balloons coated or laminated with aluminum were regularly being flown from Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. In reality, the 1947 Roswell incident was a non-event. Unfortunately, the 1947 Roswell incident has been held up as the foundation of ufology. This means, to me at least, that ufology was built on extremely fragile ground. It's no secret that the cornerstone of ufology has been falling apart. It's now time to reform ufology. Thank you. And again, I'm Dr. Bob Wenzel Gross.